40,000 Eastern Ukrainians fought against the Ukraine military in 2014. The number is closer to 30,000, but he's right, so let's get into it. The easternmost region is called the Donbas, which have the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, and that is where the majority of the war between Russia and Ukraine is taking place. The reason why these oblasts had tens of thousands of anti-Ukrainian separatists fighting the Ukraine military is because this is one of the most Russified regions in Ukraine, if not the most. This Russification happened long before the Soviet Union. Yet even still, there was a sense of Ukrainian identity in the region, but it was stamped upon harshly by the Russian Empire because they wanted everything, of course, to be Russian. But in 1917, after Russia signed an armistice with Germany in World War I, Ukraine got to exist as a country, at least until 1921. But for those 4 years, there was an attempt at establishing and pushing a Ukrainian identity. But by 1921, Ukraine got gobbled up by the Soviet Union. And the Donbas was a gold mine for the Soviet Union because it was extremely rich in coal, iron ore, and since it was already a little industrialized, there was a heavy industrial infrastructure already set up along with rail. And since the Soviet Union was aiming to heavily industrialize, they concentrated a lot of their efforts in the Donbas, and it became an industrial center. And hundreds of thousands of Russians were sent over to that region to help industrialize. Now, there were Ukrainians in the region with a Ukrainian identity, just like there has been for hundreds of years, but you have to remember something. The Ukrainians in this Donbas region were mainly farmers and peasants, and even a good chunk of them had a strong sense of Russian identity because of the heavy Russification that was taking place for hundreds of years. And remember, the Soviets took Russification to the next level, so not only did they send hundreds of thousands of Russians to Russify the Donbas region, they also promoted Russian as the dominant language, and they tried to shut down any emergence of Ukrainian culture. Within 1 or 2 generations, the majority of the native language of the people in Donbas was Russian, even the ones who were ethnically Ukrainian. And up until 1991, with the fall of the USSR, because the Donbas was such an industrial powerhouse, it was one of the most prosperous regions in the Soviet Union. Look how large the Soviet Union was, and about half of their coal production came from that little region, the Donbas, and about 20% of their steel production. This also made the Donbas of heavy strategic relevance to the Soviet Union. Look at this map of Ukraine and look at the population percentage of Russian as the most common language, 91 and 93%. Also take a look at Crimea, 95%. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, these heavily Russified regions became a part of Ukraine. Because the Russian economy collapsed, there was nowhere near as much demand for any industrial output from the Donbas, so unemployment skyrocketed to about 50%. Wages dropped by up to 80%. So the people of Donbas went from being like hot to trot to destitute in a matter of years. And this wasn't just for the people of Russian descent, I'm sure. This is for the Russified Ukrainians or just the Ukrainians in the region overall. Remember, once Ukraine was freed from Russian oppression and they voted on a referendum for independence, even the Donbas voted overwhelmingly by about 85 to 90% to be independent from the Soviet Union. So yeah, times were tough, but I guarantee you the majority of people were happy not to be under Russian or Soviet rule. Shortly after Ukraine gets its independence, Russia kind of forces them to join their own version of NATO, and then of course Russia starts leveraging Ukraine with all of the natural gas and oil pipelines that were already there from the infrastructure of the Soviet Union. Then in 2004, Viktor Yanukovych, who was a very pro-Russian Ukraine president, gets elected. He is also from the Donbas. And we can't deny that there was a small chunk of that pro-Russian population that was happy to have him as the president. So when he was ousted in 2014 after the Maidan Revolution, the people of the Donbas took that very personally. Not all of them, but a big enough chunk. And by 2015, the Ukrainian government claimed that there were 42,500 fighters on the separatists' side, including 9,000 Russian soldiers. And make no mistake, Russia spent decades working on this. Military agreements where Russia was actually allowed to keep their Black Sea fleet in Ukraine and station troops in Donbas and Crimea, and of course taking advantage of that Soviet nostalgia when times were more prosperous. and blaming the West for why they weren't. Now, while there is a great deal of evidence showing that there were Ukrainians who joined the separatist movement to actually fight the Ukrainian military, there is no proof that the Ukrainian army was attacking or marauding the people of the Donbass. Do you guys remember Yevgeny Prigozhin? You know, the head of the Wagner group, Putin's right-hand man, the guy who tried to actually launch that little revolt against him. He was also Putin's head of propaganda, and even he said that there were no attacks against the people of the Donbass. He said that the Kremlin's justifications for its invasion of Ukraine are based on lies. If you want to see his exact quote, it is right here. This is very important. Even though there were separatists, 73% of the people surveyed in the Donbass actually wanted that region to stay under Ukrainian control, and they still do. Only 4% of the people in Donbass believe that these areas should either be separated from Ukraine or actually become a part of Russia. Fortunately, it's not about what the majority wants, it's about who can be the most angry and the most violent, and here we are.